Hi, this is Brian with Prophetless Media and Post. The other day I had a comment on one of my videos about how to do the Polaroid freeze frame effect in Fusion, in which the camera dollies through a bunch of Polaroids and transitions through one of the Polaroids into a video clip. So today we're going to look at one way we can do this effect in Fusion. One of the biggest challenges in this effect is the transition. There are a bunch of ways to do the transition from the Polaroid to the live action clip. We could use a zoom effect or a blending effect or a combination of the two. But in this tutorial, we're going to look at a way we can do this so the transition is very smooth from the Polaroid to the clip. By setting the 3D camera to line up perfectly parallel to the Polaroid still at the transition point, we should get a nice transition to the live action video. If you'd like to follow along, I'll put links to all of the images and videos I'm going to use in the comments below, except for the Polaroid still, which you can just search on Google and find one. So here we are in Resolve, and we have our clip here. So if we press play, this is a great clip for this example because it's a nice dolly through some trees, but it's a little slow. So before we start getting into Fusion, I just want to speed this up. So I'm going to grab my clip and change the clip speed, and let's just double the speed to something like 200%. And that's going to be much nicer to work with. It's just a little bit faster to go through this. Okay. So now that we have that done, let's head over into Fusion. Okay, so the first thing we need to do, we're going to need a 3D camera track. So let's start with that. So let's add in a camera tracker. And put that up. Now I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but if you're not familiar with a camera tracker, I have an in-depth camera tracking tutorial on my channel, and you can look that up. I'll put it in the links below if you want to check that out, if you want to know more about camera tracking. So over in the camera tracker, the only thing I want to do is turn on the bi-directional tracking and just hit auto track. Okay, great. Once that's done, let's head over to solve and hit solve. All right, and we have an error of 0.66, which is actually pretty good, but I can see a couple points here that are not good. So I'm just going to do a quick refine, go into track filtering, hit select tracks, and then just delete, and then solve again to refine. Okay, and now we have an error of 0.57, which is pretty good. And I think that's going to be good enough for what we're going to do. So let's head over into the export. And before we export, I do want to set up an origin and a ground plane just so that the scene makes sense. So I'm going to open up the 3D scene transform. We're going to click on unaligned, and now we can select our origin and ground plane. So I'm going to grab this point right here and use that as the origin. And then I'm just going to select a whole bunch of points here on the ground, like this, right in here in the center. And we're going to use that as our ground plane. So I'll set that. Once we do that, we'll hit aligned, and that will use that information we just selected. And now we can export. Let's just take a look at this 3D scene. Okay, and that looks pretty good. We have a nice ground plane you can see right there. We can see one of the trees here, and we can see another tree there. So there's a tree, and this is a tree. So that makes sense, and that'll give us a good idea of where things are going to be in 3D space. So that looks good. Okay, so if we're happy with the camera, then we can get rid of the camera tracker now. We're done with that. For this tutorial, we won't need the ground plane, so I'm going to delete that also. And now I'm just going to make a little bit more space. So once we have our 3D tracking done, the next thing we're going to need to do is set up our first Polaroid, which will start with the transition Polaroid. Since this will be the Polaroid that we're transitioning through, this will help set up the space for all the other Polaroids, since it'll be the furthest back of the Polaroids and gives you an idea of what space we have to work with. The first thing we should do is probably figure out where we're going to do the transition. So let's take a look at the original clip. So we're going to go through, and probably about 3/4 of the way through is about where we want to do a transition. So somewhere around in here, let's pick a nice round number like 260. So we're going to use frame 260 for our transition. So, but before we bring in the Polaroid and set up our first 3D Polaroid, let's take a second to discuss what we're looking to do. What we want to be able to do is have the 3D camera dialing in, and at frame 260, we want the Polaroid image to be kind of centered in the frame and parallel to the camera, so that on frame 261, we can transition to the video clip and we won't even notice the transition. So if we keep the aspect ratio of the Polaroid the same as the video clip, we're going to be able to transition, especially if we keep it centered, we're going to be able to transition from from frame 260 to frame 261 right into the video clip, and you won't even notice that there was a transition. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we put this all together. All right, so let's bring in our Polaroid and our transition clip. So I'm going to open up the media pool. I'm going to grab our Polaroid that I grabbed. And here's our video clip that we're going to use for the transition. And let's take a look at the Polaroid first. So first thing we need to do is mat out the Polaroid so that we can swap out images in the Polaroid for all the different images we want to use. So let's just add in a mask. I'm going to grab a polygon. I'm going to bring that over here. And I don't want to connect it up, because if I connect it up, then the whole screen will go blank. So, and then let's just pick the corners. And let's just tighten this up. Okay, that looks pretty good. And we can take this polygon and drop it right onto our Polaroid. And you can see that it cut out the outside. Now we need to do the inside. So let's add another polygon. And I'm going to keep this with this image right here that I have. There's a little bit of curvature. So I'm going to keep it just a little bit outside the edge. Okay, I think that's good. Might have to make another adjustment, but if we do, then we'll do that. Okay, so we want this to be cut out. So let's see how we can do that. We're going to grab this polygon, drop it into the first polygon, and in polygon 1, what we can do, one way we can do this is in the paint mode where it says right here, it says merge. Let's change that to invert, and that will cut out the center. So now we have this nice mask for our Polaroid that we can swap out any image we want inside. The one last thing I want to do is I want to crop the outside edge so that any image we put in there is just going to be cropped off, and it only will show right inside. So let's add in a crop. Add that crop in. We take a look at that. That doesn't look good. One thing that works, and it works most of the time, is the auto crop. Let's go over to auto crop and hit auto crop. And there we go. Nice. It's got a nice cropped edge. So now we can swap out any image we want in there. So now we have that as a template. Let's take a look at the clip that the first clip we're gonna use, and this is the transition clip. Okay. The way that we want this to work is we want it to be a still frame all the way up until frame 260, where we do the transition. When we go to frame 261, we want to start the video. So we want this to be a freeze frame for the entire beginning. So one way we can do that is inside the media clip. If we go to hold the first frame, we can actually put that number in right here. So I'm going to put in 260. And see, now we have this still frame all the way until 260, and then it starts to move at 261. And that's where we're going to do our transition right here. A nice one frame transition. The next thing we need to take care of is, I noticed right here, the frame size is 4096 by 2160, and our comp size is 3840 by 2160. So that's going to be an issue. We want to make sure that it's exactly the same size. So when we do our transition, everything's going to line up perfectly. Okay, so we just need to reformat that. So in the media in, let's add a resize. By default, it'll be the frame size of the composition. So we have 3840 by 2160. Now it did squish it in a little, but for this purpose, it doesn't matter. I want it to, that's fine. Now we can merge it with our Polaroid. So let's grab our, from the resize, go right to the crop. And now you can see we have our image and the Polaroid. But we want this inside of the mask. The way the merge works is that whatever's in the background is going to define the image size. And I actually want to use the Polaroid as the image size and have everything else fit in. It just will make everything consistent when it comes to adding all the other different images into the Polaroid. One thing I can do to cut this out is to mask it using the same crop. So if we look at the crop, we have an alpha already here. So we can just plug that right into the merge, the merge with the mask. And if we look through, you can see this is just the opposite. You can see, just barely see the edge of the clip. So inside the merge, what we can do is we can just change that. So in the settings, we can go apply mask inverted. So now that image is behind it, and now we can scale this up. Now I'm going to use the merge node here to do the scaling. And now remember what we talked about. When at frame 260, when we do the transition, we need this image to be smack in the center so that when we do the transition, it's going to perfectly line up. So that means that we want the height to be pretty close to exactly with the edge of here. It doesn't have to be exact because the camera, remember we have a camera track, and the camera, as it's going through before it gets to our transition point, is still moving. So we have a little bit of wiggle room, but if we want it to make it look really good, then we need to make sure that this stays centered and pretty much perfectly framed up with the inside edges. And I'll show you how that works in a bit. If we select the merge, now we can do our transition. So if I just grab the edge, it's going to scale it perfectly from the center. And the only thing that we want to do is we want to scale it and use the Y. We don't want to use the X. If we use the X, that's going to screw everything up. And that's going to mess up our transition points. So we can move up and down. And let's just get this right as close as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we want it to be pretty close to perfect. So something like that. That looks good. So we brought our height to about the same height as the opening inside the Polaroid. That looks great. Okay. So now that we have this, we're ready to start putting this on a card in 3D space. But before I do that, one thing I did notice was the size of this image. And so this is fine if you're just going to do one card, but we're going to probably do like 10 or so cards. With them all being this size, that's really, really large for doing a 3D scene, especially this is larger than the actual render. Let's shrink this down to save on resources. So after the merge, let's grab a resize. Put that down, and then inside the resize, we want to make sure we keep frame aspect. And let's shrink this down. So if you just shrink down, let's go down something like, I don't know, something like that maybe. That's plenty big. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you keep some detail. So that looks good. And now let's add this to an image plane. I'm going to grab an image plane. And the reason I'm using the image plane is because the image plane will, when you import in an image, it will keep the proper aspect ratio. And we need that to be exactly right, or else the transition won't work smoothly. And you'll see why when we get down to that point. You can use the shape 3D, but I'll just show you real quick like what will happen. You bring your image into the shape 3D, look at what happens. It squishes it. Because the shape, the plane in the shape 3D is this size. It's a 1x1 square. And so it's going to fit your image to that. Just to save yourself a little bit of time, use the image plane when you're doing something like this, and then we have the right aspect ratio. Okay, anyway, I've talked long enough about that. Let's drop that into the 3D scene. And let's put the point cloud back in so we can kind of get an idea of scale. Okay, so I want to scale down this image for sure, because that is too large for our scene. So I'm going to take the image plane, let's go over to the transform and let's scale it down some. Let's go down about 10%. And now let's zoom in here. And that looks, that'll probably be a lot nicer. So you can play with these numbers. I think 0.1 will work, and you'll know once we get to the place, once we place this. Okay, so we know that at frame 260, what we want is this card to be perfectly center and parallel with the front of the camera. So when we look through the camera like this, we want the height of that Polaroid to be almost perfectly aligned with the height of this window. Now we're dealing with a little bit of an issue because we're on a Polaroid, which is the different aspect ratio. So the edges are cut off, and we're going to bring in the full size of the video using the Polaroid as a matte. And we'll get into that in a little bit later. But we just want the height to be the right, and we want it to be dead center. So one way we can do that, if we look at the 3D scene, is we have this camera, and when that has a whole bunch of information, we can copy that location to our image plane. So one way we can do that is just grab the camera, copy, and in the image plane, let's go to the transform. Under translate, let's right click, paste translate group, and do the same thing to rotation, paste rotate group. Now you can see what happened. Let me turn off the point cloud so you can see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so what happened was you can see now our card is perfectly parallel and lined up right in front of the camera, or right at the base of the camera. So now all we need to do is push this back in Z space. Let me just, let's put this up in that viewer, and then we're going to do the render over here, and then you can kind of see what's going on. So now all we have to do is push this back in Z space. So if I grab the image plane, and let's start move. So if we grab the image, oh wait, before we do that, we don't want all this animation. So we're going to need to delete that animation, but we want to keep the keyframe on frame 260. And we can do that by right clicking, remove all from translate group. And you can see it keeps the keyframe from that frame, but it gets rid of all the other animation. So we're going to do that to rotation also. Okay, great. So now we have our image stuck right there. And let's just move this back in Z space. So you can see it's moving back. And the way we want this to work is using just the Z and the Y, not the X. And I'll show you why in a minute. We want to keep this perfectly centered. And we just want to get this so that's just like a very little bit of white on the top and bottom, so that when we do the transition, it'll pop right into place. Kind of adjust these to get it into position. Now, if you're moving too fast, you can hold down Command. Oops. Command as you drag, and that will help move a little bit slower. Okay, so there you can see here I have just a little bit of white at the top and a little bit at the bottom. This is probably going to be good. So at this point is where we're going to do the transition. We're going to go from, you can see here we have it coming in, and then 260, 261. We're going to transition right into the video. You might even want to move that back just a little bit. Something like that. You want a little bit of room because the camera is still moving forward. You can see it's moving forward, and we just want this to blend in just right. So we can adjust that later if we want to. Okay, so let's set up our transition. So we want to go from this Polaroid in 3D space to our live action clip. Okay, so let's start by setting this up a little bit. So we have our camera track here. We want to separate the background from the Polaroid. So I'm going to unhook the background, and we're going to merge after the render of the camera tracker. So now we have the same thing, but now we have the Polaroid separated. So that's the first thing. I'm going to make a little bit more room here and just bring this guy way over here. So here's what we have at frame 261. We want to switch over to this clip here, right? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to bring this down and we're going to merge it right after. So this is our merge. So on frame 261, we want this video clip. So what we can do is in this merge, click on merge, and then we're going to go back to frame 260, and then we're going to turn it off in the blend. So now we have this keyframe. You can see how that works. So that looks, you can see that it's, because it's centered, it's going to line up just right. Now, obviously, we don't want this big pop to, to the video clip. We want to see this transition. So if we look at the 3D camera tracker, you can see what happens. It goes right through. We want this transition, the matte of the Polaroid, to show through. But we don't want this image in here anymore because that is actually scaling as it comes through. So we want to, at this frame right here, we want her to disappear and just have the matte. So one way we can do that is if we come back up to the merge. This is the merge we set up for our card. We can do this right here. So let's go to the merge settings, and under blend, let's do a similar thing. We're going to click right here to keyframe. And then on 261, when we want to go over to the next, to our video clip, we're going to turn her off. And now we have this alpha matte. And that's being rendered out from here. So we have our clip. And then right here, it switches over to just the Polaroid matte. And we're going to use that to finish off our transition. Okay, so if we're looking through here, so how are we going to add that matte in? Well, what we can do is grab a merge. We'll put the merge in this pipeline. So here now we have our video clip, and we want this to be on top of that. Okay. And remember, this merge right here is where we're doing the transition. So we're going to be starting with this, and on frame 261, we're going to switch to this. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. So you can see we have this, and then it's going to go to that. Now the only issue obviously is we need to get the background back in here. And so we can do that by using a mask. So on frame 261, when we come into this, let's grab a rectangle, and we're going to add that mask right in here at the merge. And then we'll just grab the height and the width so that it lines up. And then we're just going to keyframe the width. And we're just going to go through into the end. So let's get down to where it goes off screen and then bring this over. And then we'll just go back and make sure that it lines up with every frame. Might be a little bit more room here. Perfect. So you just match that matte, the rectangle matte, and it's keyframed to match with that. And so now we have this nice transition. So that's a nice smooth way to get through the transition. So now that we have this transition done, we are ready to bring in the rest of the cards. And so we have this setup right here. So we can use the same setup for all of the pieces. This is our card. I'm just going to grab all that. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it over here. And let's grab one of the images. So I'm going to show you the first one, how to do it. Then I'm going to pause the video and do all of them because it's going to take a little bit of time to put them all together. So I'm going to take, so now we have this piece right here. We have this clip, this image, and we're going to drop it right into our merge. And this is what it looks like. So now we're going to need to reposition that so we can go into the merge, and so it looks pretty good. Now With all these other images, it doesn't matter because we're not doing the transition, so you can move it around to whatever looks good. And that's already set up on the image plane, and we can just drop that right into the scene. And if we take a look at our scene, let's put our point cloud back on so you can kind of see what's going on. In the point cloud, let's also change it to point and make it a little bit smaller. That's a little bit easier to tell what's going on. Okay, so here's our image plane. Let's do a split screen so you can see what's going on here. This is our final render right here, and let's go all the way to the beginning. So that's a pretty good size for that, right? Yeah, it looks good. Okay, let's grab our next Polaroid, which we just did, and now all we have to do is bring that forward. You can see there it is, and here's our 3D scene, so we can kind of look at both of them. And then we just position it wherever we want. So say maybe we want it there. You can grab the rotate it around, maybe bring it like this. And so we're just going to do that with each one. And as we look through the scene, you'll be able to see like all of the different placements. So anyway, I'm going to pause the video now, and I'm going to add in all of the other still images. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, so now we're back, and I populated the scene with a bunch of Polaroids and moved them randomly in 3D space. So you can kind of see all of the different places I put them. I mean, you can add more or less or whatever you want to do, but that's the basic gist. And let's see how this looks. So we go through. You can see that looks pretty good. And let's get down to the end. We got our transition. And that looks pretty good. So let's render this out. And so before we render it out, one last thing I want to do, just to smooth it out, because these look very, very crisp, is to add a little bit of motion blur using the camera tracker. So in the camera tracker, before we render, let's go over to the render type. Let's change that to software renderer. And under settings, let's apply motion blur. And I'm going to kick this up a bunch, something like that. And that's going to give it just a little bit of blur just to make it look a little bit more natural. So let's do that, and let's go take a look at the final render. Okay, so we're going to just watch this through. Okay, and that looks really good. It's a nice smooth transition going through the Polaroid. Yeah, that looks great. So I think that's going to do it for today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out in the comments section. I'll try to answer them as soon as I can. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.